Hello and welcome to Shite Talk, an Irish History Christmas podcast special part 2. Kevin's not here because we don't want to talk to each other until the new year because it's been a tough year with COVID and doing now 20 episodes in this second season, which considering we were only meant to do about 20 episodes for the entire year, the fact that we did 20 in one season, not so bad. I'm giving us that. So I'm going to forgive us the fact that we got too drunk and ran over time for the Christmas special, so I had to split the episode into two. Having said that, I mean, here's another hour of content where you can go for a walk over Christmas, get away from your family and friends and loved ones and be alone with yourself, the one person you really want to be with over the holiday season. With all that being said, manscaped.com, not manscaping.com. They're our sponsor, as Kevin got wrong on the last episode. If you want to have your balls, taint, shaft, we could probably use it for other parts of your body as well. I don't know what parts people have the proclivity to. I can't think of an alliterative P for shaving, but just to or pluck. No, I don't think that works. But if you want to treat yourself, if you want to deforest your downstairs, if you want to landscape your landmine, if you want to, I don't know, if you want to trim up your bald hair, or if you have a partner who you want them to trim up their bald hair, manscaped.com. Use the promo code STH20. Or whatever it was in the Instagram post that you'll see there. Click on that as a link through, and then you save a bunch of money, free delivery. We've done all of our shout outs on the last episode. This is really just I meant to give a quick recap. As people say, how do you do the podcast remotely if you're both separated by 6 hours of time difference and we're both really busy? And it's because Kevin just tells me what to do and when I need to do it. So he said, say something like, and I took that to mean read exactly. I'm a big stupid gobshite from Dundalk. Larry Griffin went to Stradbally on Christmas Day 1929 and disappeared without a trace after doing his postal rounds. Several villagers say they saw him hanging around with the Gardaí in and around the vicinity of Whelan's pub, which was illegally open, and many agree Griffin was bollocksed. At the end of part 1, we just covered the testimony of a man called Jim Fitzgerald, who told the Gardaí that he'd witnessed Griffin get pushed over, bang his head, and die in Whelan's on Christmas night, while surrounded by some local Gardaí, the schoolmaster, the gravedigger, and the publicans. Also, go check Shite Talk Big Cartel. Just Google that and check out our t-shirts and merch. I say merch, we have one t-shirt. But buy that for yourself or your loved ones and support the podcast and wear it and tell people it's awesome and etc. etc. Happy Christmas and enjoy part 2 of The Postman That Went Missing.
Gather around now, you're in for a story. Old tales of lore, all in search of a glory. The history and mystery of lads, lasses and all. Discoveries and voyages, the rise and the fall. As we go back in time, we trace the steps of Irish lineage to find. Joseph from Carlo and Kevin and Dog guide you through the ways of Shite.
But while this is being told, the other man who was being questioned, Thomas Corbett, he told the guards that yes, himself and Fitzgerald had gone to Whelan's on Christmas night, but they'd been refused and turned away. So they'd gone to another bar called O'Reilly's instead, before going to a third place known as the Hall to play a game of cards. In the Hall, Corbett claimed that he got into a fight with another local there over a game, and this was corroborated by other villagers.
So the whole town was open?
The whole town was opened, and no one wants to admit that they were open because obviously they'd lose their license, and then I don't know. There's a lot at stake. There's a lot of reasons to lie, and the only reason to tell the truth is to, solve the disappearance of a policeman or a postman.
Yeah, I was going to say people don't. Here's the thing, Kev. If a postman goes missing, you don't find 100% of the post force out on the street willing to crack heads and find a name to put on
yeah.
your face.
Any man will do. But so obviously all the people that Fitzgerald implicated in his story, they all denied being in Whelan's, denied having any involvement with the disappearance. And Fitzgerald was now afraid to go home after like implicating all of the top dogs of Stradbally in his story. So he asked to be brought into protective custody, and he was brought to his house in the middle of the night to detect a few things, and then brought to Waterford City, which is not very far away from Stradbally. And I imagine, like Ireland being Ireland now, you couldn't exactly hide in Waterford to get away from the gossips of Stradbally.
Possibly. I mean, you're saying that it's difficult. The fact that one of them has an automobile,
Sure,
that's
okay.
unheard of. If you're more than a 2-hour walk from something,
You're out of reach.
yeah, like I know people in Carlow who haven't heard of Kilkenny.
Okay, all right. Once again, you've swayed me. This is a fair point. It was where like he could hide out in Waterford. They just give him a new. They called him Gerald Fitzjames, and he just disappeared into the mist. But so the very next day after Fitzgerald's testimony, Jason, on the 24th of January, the Gardaí arrested Thomas Cashin and Ned Morrissey, so the schoolmaster and the gravedigger. The two of them were charged with murder, disposing of a body with intent to disrupt the coroner's inquest, and the most serious crime of all, taking away a post bag and a postman's cap.
Okay, well, that's fantastic. But the disposing of a body in which to disrupt the coroner's report, you're like, no, that's not what I'm doing.
What you're
I'm
doing.
Disposing of a body, so you. No, but it's not. I'm disposing of the body so you don't find the body, because you'll then find that I've murdered someone.
Yeah, but how? The only way you'll find that it was you that did the murder was when the coroner does the inquest.
Yes, but like the fact that that's the reason. We've talked about this before, like seasons ago. But like is it Germany that if you try to escape from jail, that you're not punished for trying to escape from jail because it's seen as a like logical thing for a person to do, because that's what you're going to do in that situation. If you've killed somebody, you're not going to charge them for the trying to dispose of the body.
It is a separate crime. Well, I suppose, yeah, disposing of the body.
It's not. It's only a crime if you haven't killed the person. If you haven't killed the person and then you help a friend dispose of the body, then you are aiding and abetting a criminal and crime, a murder,
but that's what they're saying.
Homicide. Then that's one thing. But trying to, no, it's even still dead. Actually, do you know what? I rolled back on that and I doubled down on that and I say, Kev, if you killed somebody, it's not fair for them to punish me for if I go and help you bury them again. Like, that's not fair. Like, that's not.
Bury them again? They weren't buried the first time. Yeah, but it's a lesser crime. It's not murder. You're just hiding a body to avoid the coroner's report. Like, I'm pretty sure it's against the Geneva Convention to disappear a body. Just ask Jerry Adams.
Yeah, but here's the thing. You're not worried about the coroner's report, right? Because when you kill someone, you're not thinking like, oh, if the coroner's report comes back, they're going to find me. What they're going to find is a dead body, and then the evidence from everything else will go towards you. They're not going to be like, oh, well, by the 6-inch strap like mark on his neck, I'm going to guess that that's Kevin Larney's belt. No, it's not going to be that. Like, they don't care about your sexual preferences.
How do you think murders get solved? It's the coroner's report that like gets most of the evidence of how the body was killed.
Oh, really? In 1920s Ireland, that's how they catch. Yeah, and Sophie Descon de Plantier died in 1980 or 90 in Cork, and they still have no fucking idea that English dude definitely killed her, and they cannot prove it. You're telling me that 60 years before that motherfucker's caring about the coroner's report?
There was one coroner in the country, and he had what they called the seeing eye. He could look at a body and he'd know whether it was shot, stabbed,
dead or not.
Yeah, dead. They say he could tell from 2 feet whether the body was alive or dead. He was the best in the business.
He's just sleeping. You can see his chest rise every time he breathes.
Fair enough.
All right, fair enough.
He's got the
gift. He's got the gift.
He's got the CSI. But I thought when I wrote this, you just go on a rant about how taking a postman's hat and bag was also an equal crime to murder, but instead you seem to have fixated on them hiding the body from the coroner, which I would say is a pretty big step in a murder. It's the first thing you do. Don't let the coroner see the body.
No, but that's what I'm saying. It's the first thing that you do. Like, don't blame someone for, like...
You're just saying it's a natural process of, like, murder.
Yes!
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, there's no way out of murder. Like, even manslaughter, like, oh, I've murdered someone, I didn't mean to, but I have killed someone. You're still going to jail. So it's 100% human nature, instant reaction to go, oh, well, I'm just going to hide the body then, because what am I going to do? Turn around and go, well, I didn't mean it. I didn't, it was...
You know what? Fair enough.
If I could take it back,
Listen.
I would. Like, that's not the option. Like, even if it was 100% an accident, you're going to jail for at least a decade. So of course they're going to lie and try to bury the body. This is like was it Shallow Grave, that Danny Boyle film? Is he his first one with Ewan McGregor? You're like, yeah, bury the body. I do not have a look. I'm saying this to the listeners right now. If Not if you kill me. If you kill me, that's a dick thing to do. Like, if you mean to do it and plan it preemptively. But if just randomly happens, like I make a joke on stage, you think it's a bit untoward, you're like, I'm going to go and say something to him, and it gets physical and you kill me, hide my body. Don't admit it to the police. Like, that's ridiculous. You're going to go to jail. Don't be an idiot.
I'll say this.
Live your life.
I'll say this to you
Maybe
now.
send me ma a
I
message.
don't know if it's the pints or it's just the Christmas season, but goddamn, if I was up against it in court, I'd want you as my legal representative. You're making some salient points here. You've been talking for 2 minutes and all of a sudden I'm like, you know what? They should have hidden the body. Everybody should be disappeared. Hide it from the coroner. That's step one. Hide it from the family. That's just fucking bonus. You got a point about like a 1930s coroner's ability to do anything at a crime scene. The steps they took. So they went to Whelan's pub. And they took the stove where Larry was supposedly banged his head off of, as well as like several other items from the pub. They went to Thomas Cashin's car and took parts from it, took parts from the boot, took clothing from the two of them from their households. And then on the 26th of January, which I think was 2 days after that, Patrick Whelan, George Cummins and Patrick Cummins were all arrested as well and charged shortly thereafter, followed by Bridget Whelan and her children Nora and James. And they took bits of clothing from all of them as well to gather evidence. So at this stage, they've got like half of Stradbally's elite arrested for this crime. All based on Jim Fitzgerald's story.
The Stradbally elite sounds like a football faction or a football firm, like the Green Street elite.
We're going to bury the opposition like we bury that postman. So, based on Fitzgerald's story, several abandoned mine shafts nearby were dredged and partially explored, but it was decided that it was too dangerous to send divers down into them, so they couldn't be fully excavated. They dredged a bit of the sea, they looked in bogs, they dug up a part of George Cummins' garden, looked in a pond, and under cover of darkness, the Gardaí had to go in and exhume a few of the recent burials to make sure that, like, Larry Griffin, because one of the main suspects was the gravedigger, to make sure that, you know, they hadn't done an old twofer, doubled up in a coffin.
Oh,
that would have been a good way to do it, yeah.
Nice.
So O'Mara had just arrested like half of the town, and now he turned his attention to the Gardaí. On the 1st of February, Garda Sullivan made a statement that
Can I say this now?
Yeah?
Because we're getting to the end of this. I reckon it's a Garda cover-up. They fucked, like, it's definitely the guards killed him.
What part about all of the Gardaí lying about where they were, what they'd done, when they'd seen Larry Griffin, the fact that half of them were related to the publicans, and the fact that I've just now started this paragraph saying that O'Mara had turned his attention to the Gardaí, where are you getting this notion that they're somehow involved in this crime?
But it was funny enough that you mentioned all of those facts, because it was all of those facts that actually tipped me on to
it. Was actually everything that's happened so far that made me think maybe.
To be honest, it was actually going back to the very second that you were like, so this fella, was it O'Mara that said that I saw him walking down the street with a guard, but the guard was pushing his bike, and I was like, that guard murdered him. Like, he murdered him.
He wanted the bike, he killed him dead. Case closed. Yeah.
That bike is the now physical representation of somebody else's soul. They're living in a Flann O'Brien dreamscape, and that's what's happening. That policeman or postman, anyone with a bike, They're murdering
Yeah.
people. I know what's going on. I've seen through the prism. I see the light.
You were onto it from the get-go. But O'Mara needed a bit more evidence than you. So he interviewed the Gardaí again. On the 1st of February, Garda Sullivan made a statement where he admitted he had actually been drinking with Garda Frawley in Whelan's that night, as well as O'Reilly's and then Frawley's house later on that night. He said that they'd all...
That would have been a good interview. That would have been a fun interview. It was like, actually, I know what I said earlier on about the fact that I wasn't drinking, but actually, I was drinking with the suspects and the victim in 3 different locations.
And then we all went back to one of the suspects' houses afterwards. I'm sorry I forgot to say that the first time you asked me. So he said he went back to Frawley's house, which was, remember, above the post office. They said he went back there at 4 p.m. to sleep the drink off. He then woke up at 30 minutes past midnight when he heard Garda Daly and Garda Murphy return. So on the 3rd of February, Garda Daly and Garda Murphy were also arrested and charged. So now O'Mara's got everybody and is ready for the lawyers to come in. This is where I think there's 10 suspects now in prison, and I'm sure they're all wishing they had 2020 Jason Brennan after a couple of pints to walk up in front of the judge and just be like, what's he doing? Knocking door to door? Giving bits of mail to people? I never asked for any letters. I think, if anything, it's right that he was killed. I'm not saying that he was, but if he was, they should have murdered him and hid the body. Not from the coroner, but
and
from
long
everybody.
before they did. This is too late. This is ridiculous.
And another thing, why is half this town witnessing shit? Haven't you ever heard of community values? If someone gets murdered, everyone says nothing. The cops can't prove shit. DNA evidence isn't even a thing yet, baby.
The owner of the Specsavers and looking at the guards going, I wouldn't believe a thing anyone's saying to you. These tight bastards won't come into me whatsoever. I wouldn't
listen to a word. But they haven't got you, Jason. They've just got some boring 1930s lawyer. And on the 7th of February, there was a preliminary trial to see if there was enough evidence to get a conviction for the disappearance. Even with all the conflicting stories and witness statements, with the lack of a body, the trial heavily relied on Jim Fitzgerald's testimony. He was the only one that kind of laid out a story of what exactly could have happened that night. But when Jim was called to give evidence for the pretrial, he changed his story. He now said that although himself and Thomas Corbett had been handed drink out the window of Whelan's, they had headed right on to O'Reilly's after that, and then on to the hall to play cards. This was now in line with what Corbett had told the guards in his testimony. But Jim also said that they went back to Whelan's afterwards, stood outside for a while, and then went home. When the prosecution asked him about the change between his testimony he'd said originally and the story he just told in court, he said he may have told some lies in it, but he wouldn't elaborate what was a lie and what was true. Yeah, so some of it's a lie, some of it's true.
Look, I'll be honest. I'm going to tell you now in a court of law, I lied. What did you lie about? I can't disclose that information. That's not... that's not how this works.
My lawyers... I can't remember. So, apparently up until that morning, like that morning before the pre-trial, the lawyers had asked him to go through his testimony again, and he told the same story he told initially, and now, a couple of hours later, in the court, he was telling a story which completely destroyed their prosecution. He was like the one eyewitness that was holding the whole thing together.
Well, that must have been really frustrating because it was probably the only time in the history of legal cases that ever happened.
Yes. Well, what do you get?
So, I don't think I could be a lawyer because that for sure happens in almost every single case where someone's like,
sure,
I'm going to go on. No, I'm going to go up there. No, I'm not going to be the fifth. I'm going to answer, and you're going to answer these ways. That's going to make our case. And this
is a slam dunk, sir.
Home run, A1. Yeah, fantastic. You get up there and go, I've never seen the defendant in my life. You just said. It was a 6-hour deposition. I tell you that I was under the influence. I don't know what you're talking about.
What? No, I've never been in Stradbally in my life. Heard it's a lovely place. Great postman. Well, the only difference he made in the story that he told him, the version he told him that morning, was that Larry had still been breathing when he'd been taken out of the pub, which meant that it was for sure murder and not manslaughter. He hadn't died accidentally. If he was still breathing when he left the pub, that means he'd been killed at some point.
No, what? No.
It meant that if you fall and bang your head and you die in an instant, then it's accidental death. It's manslaughter. But if you don't die in an instant, you're still breathing, and they don't call an ambulance or get a doctor to you, and instead wrap you in a blanket, put you in a car, and drive you off into a bog, now it's murder. If they don't even attempt to save you. So, because Jim Fitzgerald was the key witness in this whole thing, and he'd now just changed his testimony, the judge gave the prosecution a week to regroup. So all the prisoners were sent back to jail and then brought back to court for the 14th of February, Valentine's Day.
Oh, very nice.
This time, two of the villagers testified that Patrick Whelan had told them that Larry had been in the pub that night, that he'd been drunk.
They didn't consider setting it the day before Valentine's Day just so that they could, escape the jack of prices. They're like, nah, we'll get these court proceedings done to the day before.
Why is it the court is suddenly €100 more expensive than the day before and the day after? What's going on? Like, all your lawyers' fees.
I'm paying for the same. I'm paying for the same court. I'm paying for the same thing. I love you just as much if we go to court today or if we go to court tomorrow. My love for you doesn't change. My passion does not subside.
It's not the same. I want to put the court case on Instagram and it will just look stupid on February 15th. No one will get it. But this time, in the Valentine's mood, two villagers from Stradbally testified that Patrick Whelan had told them that Larry had been in the pub that night, that he'd been drunk, and that he couldn't be convinced to stay the night in the pub. A pathologist talked...
How difficult must it be to find an Irishman who can't be convinced to stay the night in the pub?
So a pathologist talked about all the evidence they gathered from Whelan's and the various suspects' houses, but the only items they could determine had human blood on them were sanitary items belonging to the young women in Whelan's households. Now, they referred to as sanitary items in the thing that I read. It's definitely some sort of 1930s tampon that they found in a bin. And we're like, well, this is the only thing we can determine has blood. And in my research for this podcast, I found out that tampons were actually invented in 1931, the year after this story.
By an Irishman?
Not at all. Sanitary pads were invented in 1956. You think any Irishman even acknowledged that a period was a thing before 1991? I'm sure Gay Byrne talked about it on the Late Late Show, and all of a sudden, every father in the country turned to his wife and daughters and was like, "Ha! What? No.
Better to ignore it, because much like Downton Abbey, I'd rather not admit the existence of period drama.
There you go. So I'm not entirely sure what it was that they found in the house, but that was the only thing they could say with any certainty had blood on it, which really speaks testimony to how good the forensics team was in 19.
Again, it's not going to be good. It's not going to I've listened to West Cork, that podcast about the murder. It was bad in the 80s or 90s. It's not.
It's not great in the 30s.
That's
though.
If you take have you seen that movie, the Black Knight?
No, you're talking about The Dark Knight?
No, Martin Lawrence gets sent back in time. He's working at a medieval...
yes, The Black Knight Rises. Yes.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, Christian Bale is playing Martin Lawrence in a medieval-themed amusement park. And a time machine teleports him back to 1930s Ireland, where he screams at audio engineers for getting in his eye line. That's the concept of this film. It's a bit avant-garde. I'm trying to lean into that David Lynch type.
Ever since those letters started showing up at your door. So with the weak evidence that the pathologist brought to the court, the prosecution was given another week to get their shit together. So they all came back again on the 21st of February. This time, Garda Froley's wife gave a statement saying that Garda Daly had asked her not to mention that Garda Daly had been with Larry in Froley's apartment on Christmas Day, and also not to mention that Larry had been drunk. Another witness said that they had seen Larry and Daly walk around the corner to the back gate of Whelan's after Daly had said they went down to Kilmacthomas or wherever. But even with these two new witness statements, it wasn't enough to convince the judge there was a conviction. So again, the prosecution was given another week, bringing it now to the 1st of March, when the prosecution said they were close to finding the body. which bought them another week. Even though, how are you like close to finding a body? You've either found it or you haven't.
Yeah, like I can smell it.
It's been 3 months now, Judge, and we haven't found anything, but I can feel it in my bones. We're getting close.
Like, I'm personally getting a lot closer to divulging where I buried him. Like, that's how I know that I'm getting like very close to finding
it. So they're given another week, and on the 7th of March, the prosecuting counsel all gather around together again for another pre-trial. The prosecuting counsel says they're still making inquiries, but that they're now asking for the charges to be withdrawn and the defendants to be released. So everyone's set free.
Nice. As they should be.
Sure, I mean, there's no evidence. So the only evidence that there ever was coming from Jim Fitzgerald's testimony. So after the case collapses, Fitzgerald claims that he receives threats from multiple people in Stradbally and he could no longer find work in the town. So he asks the new lead investigator on the case, a detective by the name of Hunt. He asks him to organise to set him up with a new passport, new identity, somewhere people will never find him. He's tried hiding out in Waterford City. The best they could do for Jim Fitzgerald, a man who'd like implicated half the guards in the town, the local publican, all of his family, the grave digger, the head of the teacher, basically every powerful person in the town. The best they could do for Jim, we'll give you a job in a farm in Galway. Right, maybe they'll be able to find you in Waterford, just down the road. But Galway? Who are you kidding? You'd need to drive for like 5 hours on the back roads to get there. No one could afford the fuel.
But see, that's the thing. It's way further because of the time. Like, because Galway
sure.
now...
You probably take about 5 hours in Waterford to Galway now. Yeah, right.
Like you're looking at probably 4 or 5 hours, something like that. You're talking back then, that's like a 2-day trip.
Who's going to take the time to travel 2 days to go see the only person that ties an entire town to a murder?
But it's like the Playboy of the Western World, when the only time that like it's ever like his story is ever questioned is when his outlaw turns up and it becomes patently obvious. You're like, oh right, well he didn't travel that far. Right? He didn't travel from Waterford to Galway and was like, oh, I killed me dad the other day. It was like, that man travelled for about a day and he got maybe 20 kilometres and then his dad has followed him because he could smell him.
He was like, I'm close to finding that boy. So Fitzgerald was disappeared off to Galway. Hunt got him a job on a farm there. For some reason, Thomas Cashin, the school teacher, had never been interviewed by the Garda. His wife was interviewed at some point, and she gave an alibi for Thomas. She gave him an alibi for the whole day, so I guess they were just like, well, that's fine. He was apparently on his final warnings as a school headmaster. He'd failed the Irish exam qualification several years in a row. He hadn't even bothered to show up in 1927 and 1929. I guess at that time it was like the driver's permit.
No, but like for the
for the exam.
Just to school. Okay. He just didn't he was on his last warning because do you remember 1927 and 1929?
I don't want to bring it up, Thomas. I don't want to be like a nitpicker, but there was 2 years there where the children just had to fend for themselves.
Didn't they have the hedge for protection? They were fine.
And I'm sure learning Irish was like a new thing that they'd only had to do since like 1923. And he was an old school teacher. He wasn't arsed with that sort of stuff. But the last thing, so he was in hot water. Jason.
I just need to stay one lesson ahead of the kids in learning how to speak Irish.
Exactly. But he was on the edge. The last thing he needed was to be implicated in a murder. That would have just been a bad day for Thomas Cashin.
To be fair, though, I'm forever saying that myself.
That's true. The last thing you need now is to be implicated in a murder. But so when he was charged with murder, he was suspended from the school without pay, which is fair enough. And after the case was dropped, the Department of Education wrote to him and asked straight up, "Were you involved with the disappearance of Larry Griffin?" And he said no, and he was offended that he was even asked. He outright said no.
That's to be fair, that's what the Department of Education asked that teacher in my school who was trying to suck off that student.
Where were you when Larry Griffin disappeared? But he said no. They also wrote a letter to the Garda asking, did they think that Thomas Cashin had done it or that he was involved with the disappearance? They said that although they couldn't prove it, They were convinced of his guilt. In December 1930, a year after all this happened, Cashin had been suspended for the full year while the thing was ongoing. Gardaí said he definitely did it. Before this, he wasn't even a great teacher. He was on his last legs. So a year later in December, they reinstated Cashin as headmaster of the school and gave him back pay for the year that he'd been suspended when he was a suspect in a murder.
Too right. Good. No. Right.
Fair play to him.
If he's
I
been
hope they
cleared,
gave him interest for inflation.
Yeah, if
and
he's
damage
been
is
cleared,
done.
That's not his fault. Like, the man's
No.
been... Just because you take 2 years off of work without telling people doesn't mean that you should be held.
And then a third year where you had to skip work because you were a suspect in a murder.
Yeah, that's not...
That the guard said you definitely did.
Yeah, but the guards did it, so...
Well, I mean,
can't be
that's
trusting
fair.
them.
That is actually a good point. I mean, they are also the other lead suspects in this crime. Well,
I don't know.
speaking...
Given the choice, I wasn't sure who to prosecute, but given the choice that the number one suspect was somebody else and the number two suspect was me, I decided to put all my eggs in the "it's not me" basket.
Speaking of the Guard of Conduct, in February of 1930, Thomas Corbett, who'd been brought in and interrogated, he sued the guards himself. He brought his own case against the Gardaí who had interrogated him, claiming damages for false imprisonment, assault and threat of murder. So according to Thomas, they tried to bribe him into saying that he was in Whelan's that night, and when he wouldn't do that, they threatened to kill him. He claimed the Gardaí had brought him out to a nearby cliff edge and then threatened to throw him off, and then that another one had put a gun in his mouth and threatened to pull the trigger.
Where did they get a gun?
Yeah, I don't know, they must have had it on loan from the army, but presumably after they threatened to throw him off
loan from the IRA.
Probably, actually, yes. But presumably after they threatened to throw him off a cliff and then put a gun in his mouth and threatened to pull a trigger, whoever else was with him was like, they were probably wondering where they'd shoot a man before throwing him off a cliff.
Sure, they're probably wondering why they'd shoot a man before making him take steroids and putting him in a load of films, even though he's only 5'8" and he's meant to be some giant fucking hero. They're probably wondering why you would make someone listen to the sound of a film before releasing it to see if anyone could understand what the fuck you're saying.
It's like a mix between Indian and like an Indian Sean Conroy. So the Gardaí obviously denied everything, as they're wont to do, but the jury ruled in favour of Corbett, and he got £500 in damages and £500 to cover the costs of the case. And that's 500 old pound.
That's big money.
Which
fat stacks.
Yeah, I mean, again, we've covered this many times. It's hard to kind of like translate how much old punt was worth in current money. But the first place I tried to search it said that it was worth 75 grand. So that's a lot.
Not bad, not bad. It's a lot less than what Stephen Avery was looking for. But
sure.
Yeah, I also have a feeling that a Stephen Avery existence might happen to this dude pretty quickly.
Well, so the Gardaí were all given the choice to resign or be dismissed, and they all chose to step down. But now they all owed Corbett 75 grand in 2020 money and had no job, which is, problematic. So they were trying to make a deal with him for the money, which was making the Whelans and the Cashins uneasy, as they thought Corbett might reveal what he knew about Griffin's disappearance in exchange in order to get the money. But Corbett's solicitor eventually bought out the damage claim for £125 on the condition that the guards had nothing to do with Corbett again.
£125?
Yeah, so he got £125 out of 500 that he could have got, I guess.
Oh, so that's like what, 20 grand a minute? They get modern money.
Yeah, but I guess realistically he was never going to again. I'm not entirely sure about this part of the story. It seems like the guards got fired over it, but that they were going to try and make a deal with Corbett that he would get his money if he admitted to what he knew, which then they would probably use to get themselves reinstated as guards because they cracked the big case. Because at this stage this is like a national embarrassment. The Garda force had only been set up for about 5 years.
It's not just now, Kevin. Waterford's always been a national embarrassment.
But the Garda force had only been on the go for about 5 years, and now they're embroiled with the murder and cover up of a local postman, and the head of the school was there, and the head, local publican. All the sturdy pillars of the community were involved in this shady deal.
Well, if you're going to be having illegal pints on Christmas Day, I want all the pillars of the community involved.
That's pretty much it. That's the reason they were there, is because they were the cool kids. I run this town. No one can keep me out of Whelan's on Christmas Day. Rack up another shot of Sambuca there. Apparently, after Corbett's lawyer got him the £125 and the case was dropped, there was big celebrations in Stradbally. All the previous defendants took Corbett and his wife out to celebrate. He can't tetanus now. He's got his money. Everything's grand. So this is what we'd mentioned earlier on in the debate. Litigious people. Later on in 1930, the Whelan family won 2 settlements. One from Waterford News Limited and another from the Cork Examiner. Both papers had written articles that implicated the Whelans in Larry Griffin's disappearance. They were awarded about $2,000 between the 2 payments, which is much more than Corbett was awarded for being beaten up by the Gardaí.
I'd say that's around €300,000 in modern money, Kev.
Yes. So, and as you remember from earlier on, the Whelans, the pub was on its last legs. They were getting sued by the landlord, the creditors, everybody. And now they've just won a shit ton of money by suing a newspaper for saying they're involved with a murder. So that sort of sets a precedent over the next couple of years. In 1954, 2 of the Gardaí, Murphy and Sullivan, sued a British newspaper for saying that Griffin had died while in police custody. Because another one of the rumours that was going around was that Griffin had been brought out of Whelan's and back to the barracks to sleep off the alcohol, and he then wandered out of the cell and fallen down some stairs that didn't have a railing and died, and that the guards had covered it up then. So that story was printed in a British newspaper, and the 2 guards sued them and won for another undisclosed amount of money. In 1974, Thomas Cashin, the schoolteacher, James Whelan, Nora Whelan, George Cummins took a libel action against Waterford News and Star over a review of a play which was based on Griffin's disappearance. They won that as well. In 1977, the 2 Whelans, James and Nora, sued the Irish Times for an article that was written on the case.
This is exactly why I don't want you to do a Dennis O'Brien special.
Why? Just because early on they figured out that they could make money off suing newspapers for printing a story, and then spent the next 70 years through 2 generations suing newspapers and making a ton of cash.
Yeah, and
Dennis O'Brien is a very wealthy man who's got a shady beginning and then has made an awful lot of money just suing everyone, and then also owns half of the media in this country and then sues the other half, and has fired people who work in the media that he owns for speaking against them.
Kevin, that would be exactly why. And also the fact because
You're just being paranoid.
And I'm a former employee of his, and I know that the company that I used to work for while I was being under his employment also hemorrhages money, so they would love the chance to sue us. This newfound fangled podcast medium, one of Ireland's biggest, best and brightest podcasts that there is, Shite Talk History, at us at Buy Me a Coffee, give us money there. Shite Talk History at buymeacoffee.com. Follow us on Instagram at Shite Talk History. Email us at shitetalkhistory@gmail.com.
I will say that anyone who buys a t-shirt from Shite Talk at Big Cartel, all t-shirt money will go forward to the future getting sued by Dennis O'Brien litigation fund. Actually, I think we should just start printing t-shirts that say "Don't sue me, Dennis O'Brien."
I'd be okay with it.
I'm already emailing the t-shirt guy about this. This is you can find that t-shirt and all of the t-shirts at Big Cartel Shite Talk History.
Well, shout out to the East Wall Printing Company for actually making those t-shirts for us. And next year they'll be making the Dennis O'Brien Please Don't Sue Me.
So this sort of set a precedent for making money off of lawsuits, and as we established, the Whelans Bar was on its last legs in 1930. But between the successful lawsuits and then a cash loan from Thomas Cashin, the pub managed to keep open, and it's still open today in Stradbally. It's run currently by Patrick and Bridget's grandson.
So you're telling me that we head down to
100%,
Waterford?
yes, 100%. As soon as you're back in the country, we're going to go down to Whelans of Stradbally and have a pint, maybe 7,
maybe 12.
Maybe never be seen again.
I might knock your head off of a cooker, and then you'll never be seen ever again.
So 2 days after Jim Fitzgerald was relocated out of Stradbally, moved to Galway, he was interviewed again in Galway by Hunt, who was the new head of the investigation. Jim changed his story a third time.
He was a real piece of work.
He was a real country Hunt. Jim changed his story a third time. He said that he had been in Whelan's between 7:30 and 8 on Christmas night. He saw Garda D'Elia and Larry Griffin there around 8, and then left Whelan's shortly afterwards, at which point he met up with Tommy Corbett and Patrick Cunningham. They moved on to O'Reilly's pub, and after that they went to the card game in the hall where Tommy Corbett and another man got into a fight around 11 o'clock. After that, he went home with Tommy Corbett, and Patrick Cunningham went off in a different direction. Fitzgerald told Hunt that he had gotten the initial story about Larry's death second-hand from Tommy Corbett, who had heard it from his employer, Patrick Cunningham. It was in fact Cunningham who had gone to Whelan's after they'd all left each other on Christmas night and witnessed the events that he described. It's only since about 2010 that people have been able to research this properly, as before this there was a real threat of lawsuits from the family and also general hostility in a town of, I don't know what the population of Stradbally is, but it's a small town. Everyone's related to one another. If one person murders another and there are like 10 people
They're not all
involved
inbred, Kevin. It's like a small fraction, but it's not fair to tar them all with the one brush.
But if there's 10 people suspected of a crime and then a murder victim, so 11 people involved in a crime in Stradbally, and then you extrapolate that out 100 years, I'd say 40% of the people in the town are related to someone who was involved in the murder.
They're not English royalty, Kev. That you can separate yourself from your own fucking bloodline if you want. Like, that's not like, keep it at an even 15%.
Sure. The general consensus from people who are researching it now is that this statement of Fitzgerald's was the closest to the truth, and that he had heard the story secondhand from Cunningham, but that this is probably what happened. And I'll say a big probably because of the 100 years of lawsuits that have followed this case.
You say that, but when you said probably, you gave it the exact same inflection and tone that you did the first time.
Yeah.
So it's not very a big probably, because it should have been a big probably.
I'll put an asterisk in front of it and an asterisk after it so that it's bolded in WhatsApp. That's what I mean when I say it was probably Cunningham that did it. So after the trial collapsed, there were no further arrests ever made in the case of Larry Griffin, and his body was never found. The fact that his body was never found meant that Larry's wife Mary couldn't avail of a widow's pension, which seems like a really bad requisite.
Fucked.
It is fucked. In a story of many things that were fucked, that is pretty fucked.
What did they like? Oh no, well, we can't prove he died. He might have just ran away. It was like, well, he would have left his bike there. It was like, yeah, but that's why he ran away.
If he had had his bike, he would have cycled away. Keep with the story.
And then you would have got the pension.
I don't know at what point you can declare someone legally dead, but surely at some stage she would have got the widow's pension. But so at the time of his disappearance, there was a collection for the family which got together £200, which is a lot for the time, but also
like 30,000, 30,000.
No, what did we say? Yes, actually, yeah. So 500 was 75,000. Yeah, so 30 grand. You know, you wouldn't sneeze at it, but if you had to raise 2 or 3 or 5 children or whatever it was that you had, and also sustain yourself for the rest of your life, it's not ideal.
Fair.
One of the postmasters who'd worked with Larry lamented his disappearance and commented that Larry had travelled 3 continents with the army, and yet he'd gone missing in his own home area.
Isn't that always the case?
It's always the case. Yeah, I mean, it is kind of shocking that he literally travelled the world, risking his life to fight in various wars, including World War One, and then he was murdered in his hometown.
You don't know he was murdered. We don't know.
That is true. So no one ever found out exactly what happened. So it was like in 2009 there was that RT documentary was made about the case. The author Fachtno Driscoll worked on it, and in the documentary they called for like the Garda files to be released, because at that point it was 90 years after the murder had happened and the Garda files still hadn't been released. But after that RT documentary they were. And then Facta went on to write a book called The Missing Postman that was based on those files, which is where, between those two things, that's where the majority of this episode came from.
I think this is one of this sounds like one of those. I was going to say one of those classic Irish stories of murder that never gets solved. There's not been that many of them.
I don't think so.
But then things like this pop up, and I'm like, I know someone died in my town like 20, 25 years ago when I was a kid. I don't remember, obviously. And when I was growing up, maybe 10 years ago or so, someone died. So that's 2 murders in my village in the space of like 20, 25 years.
Yeah.
Murders do happen in Ireland. They're just never talked about. Like, they're just never referenced.
But like, this is, I mean, if Fitzgerald's events are to be believed, and you'd imagine this is pretty easy to pull off, a murder happened. An accidental murder. Someone died.
No, it's not a murder. It's not
a murder. Someone died, and there was a lot. Someone died in the company of the important people of the town doing something illegal, which would have brought undue attention onto them and what they were up to. You know, the pub could have been shut down. The guards would have lost their job. Thomas Cashin might have got fired as the principal of the school or whatever. And they all decided that if the 10 of them in the pub, if they said it didn't happen, then it just didn't happen. And they were proved right. It was a time when there was no forensics evidence, so if there was no body, and they all say nothing happened, then who's to say otherwise?
I had a friend who used to say that about cheating on his missus.
Yeah. I mean, but you might, like, how many times do you think that happened all around the country? Where they're just like,
if a tree falls in the wood and there's no one around to hear it, have I really got my dick wet?
That, like, if a tree falls in the wood and the guards, the priest, the local publican, and the gravedigger and the gravedigger say it didn't fall, then, like, there was never a forest there to begin with. What are you on about? And fuck off.
Well, also, if you've died, but then the priest and the gravedigger are like, no, I didn't see any deaths. Well, did you die? Because, like, they're the 2 people who know the most about it.
Yeah. Especially, like, that. This is. I mean, it's a couple of years after the War of Independence, Civil War, but, like, you know, it was a war-torn country. People were dying all the time. What's another man? When I started reading this episode, I assumed that, like, you know, at the start of the story, as he goes off and fights for the British Army, he worked initially for the British Post Office. I assumed that when he was murdered and disappeared, there was some sectarian element to it, but it never came up. I think he was just a man died by accident. People were drunk and a bad decision was made, and everyone was like, fuck it, if we do it, we'll get away with it. And they were correct. Or maybe none of that happened at all and he just fell into a bog hole and was never found again. That's, you know, it could have happened. I'm a bit cautious because, yeah, I mean, again, like, the guy who runs the pub is the grandson of the people who ran the pub back when this happened. Larry Griffin's daughter-in-law is still alive. She's 100, but still alive and kicking in Kilmacthomas.
She's kicking people.
She's kicking them left, right, and centre. She's saying, "Where's my father-in-law?" But it's about that comes up a lot in this podcast. But, like, you know, 100 years ago seems like that's so long ago. 100 years ago, how can you be, like, still worried about shit from 100 years ago? That's someone's dad, and admittedly they're 100 years old, but it's someone's grandparents. You know.
Yeah.
That's 3 generations of people, which is not enough time to wash out bad feelings in this country.
The world over, like, at a certain point, you're just going to have to get over it. Like, live your life. Like, I know that I was on a film set, like, 3 years ago, maybe, with this 6'7", like, Navajo Indian dude. And he was talking about how his dad's brother, maybe it was his dad, actually, I forget, but was murdered on an Indian reservation, and it was all covered up by the tribe, and they never got to the bottom of it because it was some, like, well-to-do person in the tribe who, like, owned casinos or something. And I was like, oh wow, when did it happen? He was like, back in, like, 75 or 76. I was like, why are you still talking about it? Why are you still, like, it's nothing's gonna be done about that. You're talking about, like, if it was gonna happen, it was gonna happen at the time. Like, that's Oh, that happened 4 days ago? The police have moved on to something else. There's so many other people who've died.
Do you know how much crime could happen in 4 days?
You're talking 40 years ago. They don't care about shit that happened 4 days ago. So new shit happened today. It's new. It's like it's fresh. It's cool. People heard about it. It's on Twitter.
Well, my housemate said that he was working at an event, and one of the guys who was working on the site was related to Larry Griffin. And then, by coincidence, they found out that one of the other guys who was working on the site was related to one of the people who was one of the suspects in the murder. They were both 2 generations removed, and they were like, what are the odds? You know, my old man might have killed your old man. Classic Ireland. Small world moment. #lol.
And they all laughed about it then, but it was awkward for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, neither of them has been seen since. So, I'd read a quote at some point, like someone had went to interview someone in Stradbally for a documentary on the series, and they walked up to them and asked, was it upstairs or downstairs in Whelan's that Griffin was killed? And they were told to get the fuck out of here. But if you're still, like, I mean, imagine the sort of...
To be fair, that's not a fair representation of, like, that doesn't point to the words, like, anything to do with the murder, because
no,
as a former media member, I don't call myself a journalist, but as a former media member, I've been in that situation, or I've had friends. You've met my mate Paul before. I remember he had to go up to Ballymun when we were in DCU for like one of our projects. We all did, like, we were doing journalism in college, and go up and do a radio documentary about something happening in Ballymun. So he went up and, like, whatever he was doing about the local area, he went up to Vox Pop, just like ask people questions. First person he went up to, and he's like, hey, so I'm talking about the youth systems in Ballymun. He's like, get to fuck, you cunt, go home, fuck off. Like, that is just Irish people's standard reaction to putting a microphone in their face.
But it's the same. You imagine the level of, like, a power trip that you have if you've literally committed murder and then gotten away with it. It's like
why would I have to imagine it?
I know you know the feeling.
I do it on stage every single night of the week, Kevin. I'm talking 2019. Remember what life was like?
Bombing people out of it. But it's like the classic Christmas film, The Great Escape, where, like, they all break out of the concentration camp and they're about to get onto the bus, and the German interrogator's like, have a nice trip. And then he answers back in English, and then they're fucked. They've just been gotten. Imagine you get away with murder. You convince an entire town to collaborate on this. They've all kept hush for 50 years. You just got away with murdering a postman. And then some news reporter comes down and is like, so, is it upstairs or downstairs he was murdered? And you're like, well, actually, let me give you a grand tour of where we hid the body, where we took him away.
What are you talking about? It was outside.
Actually, funny enough, they never even got close to it. It was outside of the front door. You're not going to fuck up at that stage. They're not going to be like 50 years later, like, get the fuck out of here. I'm not fun this weak bullshit. I got away with murder, son.
We'd never be able to... What are you talking about? Of course it was outside. We'd never be able to hold a sacrificial ceremony inside the pub. There's no space.
You don't understand. We weren't getting our parcels.
It's an ode to Jeff Bezos. We burnt Griffin to the ground to make sure that we could get things on time.
Well, that was a very long and unfestive episode. I'm aware that last year we did a Christmas episode about the 1916 Rising, which wasn't very Christmassy. And this year I've done an episode about a postman that may or may not have been murdered, but irregardless, an entire town colluded to keep his body hidden from his widow for 100 years. It's not very festive.
What day is it?
Well, by the time
but that's what we can do.
Christmas
We
week.
can just make it festive by just quoting like classic movies. Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker!
We need to get the Turbo Man. I know our last episode ended sort of sentimentally because it was the final episode of a long COVID-y year. And this episode is probably going to end sentimentally because it's Christmas. And despite the fact that we've just delivered you an episode about a postman that got murdered, I've still got a warm, fuzzy feeling inside. It's a magical time of the year.
The fact that I've heard a story about a postman being murdered has given me a warm, fuzzy feeling inside. I was sans that beforehand. Now I'm full of it. I'm full of festive fun.
So this will be the second sentimental ending in a row. Something which we promise not to carry on into season 5 in the new year. But
we will. That's the thing. We still haven't, and we won't. Because this is
we won't.
This is not season 5. We were very...
Yes, actually, I was trying to figure out this morning, is this the end of season 4 or is this season 5 episode 1? It is the end of season 4. Yeah.
This is a bridge in between. This is your bridge over the River Kwai.
This is your methadone to keep you going over Christmas until the new hot heroin of season 5 hits the airwaves in mid-January.
That black tar heroin, also known as Shite Talk History, season 5.
There you go. Have a nice Christmas. Have a nice New Year's. All the pubs in Ireland are probably going to be closed on the 28th, which will be a bit shit, but I don't know. Choose your house visits well. See the people that matter. Text all your mates that you've been thinking about. If you've just been sitting at home thinking about, like, God, this time of year I'd usually bump into that friend and go for a pint with them in the pub, but because I can't see them, I just won't talk to them until some point in 2025. Just send them a message.
Or Zoom chats, quizzes, have fun with your friends, talk to people. It's a thing. You're going to be sick of your family. Now, because of COVID, now we won't have pubs. So, go, get drunk, do your drugs still. Go into the bathroom, hop over a cubicle so you can snort a line from a friend's card. It's great crack. It's Stevens' night. Go mental, but do it from the safety of your own home. And if you're going to shift somebody, just be 75% sure minimum that you're going to get the ride. Don't be doing it just for the sake of a shift. You're going to kill someone. But if you're going to have sex with that shift, then just be sure that it's probably going to lead to that. Don't be like out there randomly. Yes. Don't be lobbing the gob.
No. Choose your battles carefully.
Choose your hill to die on. And then that's it. Happy Christmas from Shy Talk History. We'll see you next year.
That's a great endorsement. Take care of yourselves, and hopefully we'll all be shoving vaccines up our noses in January and be back to having normal crack by the middle of July.
Right. We're not going to get sentimental and emotional with it. I love all of you. Bye.
Goodbye. Also, if you find Larry Griffin's body over Christmas, do the right thing. Keep it to yourself.
And buy some Manscaped products or our t-shirts and all of that stuff. And follow us the podcast or us individually on Instagram. All of that stuff. Clout chasing 2021, the year of the clout.
Get that clout.
Shafter.